Welcome into the Locked On Knicks podcast. I'm Gavin Schall, and today I'm lucky enough to be joined by Jackson Frank, who is a writer for Dime. Jackson did a profile on Quentin Grimes where he got to talk to Quentin, got to talk to people around him. So we dive into what the writing process was like and how Quentin became the player he is today. All that and more right now on Locked On Knicks.
You are Locked On Knicks, your daily New York Knicks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are Locked On Knicks, your daily New York Knicks podcast. I want to thank you for making Locked On Knicks your first listen today and every day, and remind you that today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Last-minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. But who's talking to you? I'm Gavin Schall, your favorite play-by-play broadcaster's favorite play-by-play broadcaster. And I'm really excited to get into it with Jackson. This is going to be a two-part episode, so check this one out. And then in part two, we will finish up talking about Quentin Grimes and come back and do a little Knicks Cavs preview. So all that and more right now on Locked On Knicks. All right, guys, as promised, we are joined by the fantastic Jackson Frank, a writer for Dime, who put together an incredible piece on Quentin Grimes titled In Control. Quentin Grimes is writing his own story with the Knicks. I read it, Jackson, as I told you over Twitter, but I'm happy to tell you in person, I loved it. It was so cool to get an insight into someone who I think is probably like one of the more unknowable guys on the team, is generally like pretty stoic. Like things can be good, things can be bad. The expression doesn't really change. And this was a real insight, like 1 and 2, his development and what makes him such a Tibbs favorite. And I mean, a guy who was always like described as having a ruthless work ethic, but to get the specifics of it was really cool, but also to learn more about him as a person. So thank you for bringing that to me. Thank you for bringing that to Knicks fans everywhere.
Yeah, I think that was the really cool part, is just as I worked on that story, people telling me all these parts, about his personality, because I really enjoyed watching Quentin, and I still do, because of his on-court game. I didn't know anything about him as a person, so it was cool that people are so willing to share that, and that I could in turn share it with fans or people who learned about him for the first time. So I appreciate the kind words, and I'm glad that the goal was to get people to know more about him off the court, and that seems to be accomplished, at least from your perspective. So great to hear.
Yeah, well, take it for what it's worth. But I was kind of curious. I mean, I guess you just kind of hinted at it, but what inspired you to write about him initially? Because obviously someone I think in Knicks circles is very beloved, but I would presume from a league-wide perspective, like doesn't necessarily have that recognition yet, doesn't necessarily have a wide frame of appreciation. So as someone who covers the sport nationally, like what made you zoom in on him?
Yeah, so I mean, just initially, when he was a pretty big part of the Knicks. Yeah, I would say kind of in-season turnaround once he found his footing, once he came back from injury and was inserted in the starting lineup. And I just wanted to do a story on that. And, somehow I got, at Dime we had, connections to, people in his agency, and I wanted to do something on that. But then it just grew from there. And our goal at Dime with these cover stories is to kind of highlight those players that are a little less renowned. We did our previous one was on Bennedict Mathurin. Before that was Grant Williams. So guys that you kind of know if you follow the league, but maybe you aren't entirely aware of kind of what they're like off the court and things like that. Grimes was an especially interesting one because he is quite renowned in youth circles and in high school, or I guess in college circles, because he started at Houston and because he had, the 1 year at Kansas didn't go according to plan. So it was a good challenge to write about and feature someone maybe had part of their story told to this point, but not through to the NBA part. So that was cool. And that was again the goal for us with these cover stories, is to shine a light on some of these guys that are making waves on the court, but maybe we don't know a lot about them off the court. So so it just started out wanting something about his on the court impact and talk with him, and then it got to be something much more than that. And I'm grateful that it got to that point. But that we're still able to shine a light on what he's doing with the Knicks this year and how he's been integral to what they're doing on both ends as they prepare for the playoffs now.
And you emphasize in the story that he is a guy who has a close circle, and like if you're in that circle, like he trusts you, he loves you, will go to the ends of the earth for you. And I guess like when talking to someone like that and who has those inclinations, like what was is your dog apparently very enthused by Quentin Grimes in the close circle.
She's playing
Yeah. I mean, how do you kind of like, just as a writer, like, how do you kind of break through that initial wall and like kind of get through with a guy like that and get all the insights you got in the story?
Yeah, it made it easy because I talked with quite a few people who were close with him before I ever spoke with him. So I had a lot of kind of guiding points and things I could talk with him about. Obviously, we talked basketball, but I had a lot of other stuff that I came armed with because of what, the time and information that people are gracious enough to give me beforehand. And so we like I said, I worked closely with other people, and they, that know him well, and they gave me kind of things to, that maybe be interesting to discuss with him. And so it made, like, I think the first 20 minutes of our conversation, at least we didn't talk. We talked about food, fashion, shoes, some stuff I didn't even get to mention in the article. Is he's randomly, like, a couple of years ago, learned how to play the piano. Just like sat down one day and played it, and he learned how to juggle. He during like the height of COVID, he was quarantined with his mom, and they would play tennis, and all of a sudden he just learned he could juggle. So a lot of it was just stuff like that, being able to talk about off court stuff because he's talked a lot, I'm sure, about his on court experiences and will continue to. So just kind of making clear that I was interested in more than that made it easy. And he was a super great interview the entire way. I didn't feel like there was any sort of disconnect between us. Really easygoing guy, super easy to have conversation with. And that was another thing that, like, people kept stressing that are around him, is like he's a real person, and that's not to disparage other athletes, but just how thoughtful he is and how willing he is to have a conversation with whoever it is, regardless of background and status. So that made it easier for sure. Like I said, I was grateful to be able to tell the story, but it made it really easy with him and everyone around him that wanted to share the story with me and to let me present it, and kind of construct it in the way that I saw fit.
Yeah, and I guess to clarify even what I was asking, like, it's nothing really about Quentin. Like, when you hit that level of fame, like, you're kind of told by everyone around you, like, hey, be cautious, be careful who you talk to, because it can be spun a certain way, it can be taken a certain way, and sometimes, like, stuff, like, far from being misconstrued, like, can be just, like, taken entirely out of context, and like, and you're not really getting across what you want to get across by yourself. So it's a credit to you, but also like a credit to him that, like, these are the kind of stories like you got much more frequently, like 20, 30, 40 years ago. And now, like, it's hard to get to that kind of depth. And I think that's what I really enjoyed about it. I'm kind of curious how you would describe the role his parents and just based on the story, like particularly his dad, played in his development, because there just seems like there's a rare self-awareness with him about his game that, like, when I think about, like, the guys who, like, I know you're someone who has, like, some interest in the draft and, like, prospects, and, like, I'm, like, far from being an expert on that, but I'm always interested to kind of go back and say, like, all right, who made it, who didn't make it, why did they make it, why didn't they make it? And a lot of times I think, like, obviously capacity and, like, athleticism, like, all play a significant role. And if you don't have certain, like, physical skills, it's not going to matter. But it always does kind of circle back to self-awareness and saying, like, all right, like, we're talking about a guy who was a 5-star guard in high school, like top 10 player, like one of the highest ranked point guards, combo guards, depending on the service in the country. And he's going to the University of Houston after transferring from Kansas. And you're talking about, like, yeah, he was focused on screen navigation. He was focused on rebounding. He was focused on having elite conditioning. And, like, to me, that circles back, again, based on the story, like, to stuff that his parents kind of instilled in him. All right, guys, it's about that time. Let's talk about game time. I know that I'm kind of stressing out about how to get into a Knicks playoff game, because I know I want to go, I want to watch in person. It just doesn't happen so often. But how do I find a great price at the last second? Well, there's a new solution for that. With killer deals on last minute tickets and their best price guarantee, you can stop stressing over the tickets and start getting hyped for all the fun you'll have with Game Time. Game Time is the place for last-minute tickets. Forget planning months in advance. Game Time has deals on tickets right up to the day of the event. Get exclusive flash deals on tickets for football, basketball, baseball, concerts, comedy, theater, and more. The Game Time guarantee means you'll always have the best price. If you find tickets in the same sections and row for less, Game Time will credit you 110% on the difference. It's the fastest growing ticketing app in the country for a reason. Get images of your seat before you buy so you know exactly what to expect when you arrive. And the brilliance is, unlike some other apps, you can buy tickets in a matter of seconds, 2 taps, and you're set. Tickets are sent directly to your phone, so you never have to dig through your email. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed.
Yeah, well, I think really that turning point, maybe maybe I didn't necessarily frame it as well as I should have, but that turning point for him really came when he got to Houston.
Yeah.
He conceded that in Kansas a lot of times, like he knew coming into his freshman year, he was projected lottery pick, and he had been a really good scorer, shooter, offensive player, throughout his high school career. And so a lot of his thoughts constantly worried about how he was shooting, how he was scoring, things like that. Because they'd always been there for him, right? Like you don't really think about that being a problem if it's something that's always come naturally to your game or always been part of your game. And so when he got to Houston, he was shooting okay from three and struggling from the field overall, or excuse me, at Kansas. He didn't quite know how to find other ways to impact the game. And at Houston, that's a team that's constantly in the top of defensive efficiency every year under Kelvin Sampson. They really hammer home rebounding. And that took a little bit of time for Quentin to adapt to, and they and when he started with that, they had him run a lot of sprints. And I don't know if that's the one thing I wanted to talk more with him about, but like the conditioning obviously is like, it feels like he's always go, go, go.
Yeah.
Like the first closeout that he attacks in a game is the same speed that he attacks it in, can be triple overtime, something like that. So I think that's definitely something that helped there. But he just figured out ways that like he just talked about Coach Sampson really instilling in, like, yeah, you go 2 for 10, but you could pick up the guy full court, their best scorer. You get 6 rebounds from the guard position. You could get a couple of steals. And I think maybe as fans or just as analysts, we think that's something that kind of, I don't know if comes naturally, but we just assume that you realize that. Maybe it sounds cliche, but I think it was really fascinating to hear from Quentin firsthand that like it took time for him to get there. Because I was doing prep work too for this article, because I didn't want to just hit the same notes that everyone else had played when they'd done profiles of Quentin or Charles. I mean, it was fascinating to hear kind of just how advanced and vast his offensive allure or skill set was coming into Kansas, playing in high school. Because I didn't watch him there. I watched a little bit at Houston. My first real, deep introduction wasn't until last year as a rookie. So, he was a 3-and-D guy, right? And he's become more than that this year with, his passing and his ability to get to the rim, off the catch. But it was just fascinating to kind of hear that because, I first really enjoyed his game because of the defense. So to hear that, like, that took a while for him to understand and embrace was really interesting. So, yeah, but his parents, I think they both did a really good job. Like the problem solving part, I think is fascinating. Something like his mom was really good about instilling that in him. And I think that's a broad theme of just kind of his life to this point. But you also see it on the court where like he's so good at kind of making quick decisions and kind of just adapting on the fly to where the defense is giving him. But then, yeah, I think his dad the same way was like, hey, like if you want to get to this point, if you want to get to a certain level, you're gonna have to work really, really hard. We're not going to force you to get there, but I'm going to give you the resources, that allow you to get there if you're interested in it. So, yeah, they were great talking with me, and Quentin was obviously very complimentary of them. But yeah, the whole thing is it's just a team effort, whether it's the parents, it's, people around him, it's the coaches, the different places he's been. But yeah, it seems like maybe I'm sure they played a role on each side. I don't want to, misallocate things, but the problem solving came maybe more from his mom, and maybe the work ethic and some of the specific training habits came more from his dad. But I don't want to overemphasize that. Obviously, I'm sure they played a hand in all of that together. So, but yeah, like I said, it seemed like very much a group effort. And maybe that understanding of kind of the little things really went off. The light bulb really went off at Houston when he was having to run a lot and whatnot and adapt to a different style of program, because obviously Kansas and Houston are well accomplished, especially over the last 6, 7, 8 years. Kansas has the deeper history, but 2 really good programs. But it's fascinating to kind of hear of the adjustment that it took going from one esteemed program to the next.
Just in terms of, I guess what I was trying to get at earlier in terms of his self-awareness, you talked about him raising his release when he was younger. And this was something we also talked about with Scott Chasen when he came on the podcast over the summer, guy who covered him at Kansas. And his dad kind of looked and said, like, hey, if you really want to make it on high level, like you're not looking like you're going to be like 6'8", 6'9". Like he ended up being 6'5". Like what could really separate you. And we've seen it particularly the last 10, 12 games or so, is a high release. And he kind of fired back. Quentin fired back, and he's like, hey, Steph Curry doesn't have a high release. And you know, when you're playing in middle school and you're probably scoring 40 points a game, you get to say that because you're the Steph Curry of middle school, right? he's probably bombing 30-footers, and he's like, are you kidding me? Like no one's stopping this. And like his dad had the foresight to say, like, yeah, not now, but like maybe in college and definitely in the NBA, like there are going to be shots you can't get off if your release isn't over your head. And to me, like that just seems like such a like clear-cut point of like, oh, okay, like what works now won't work later. And like, I guess to circle back to what I was saying before, like when I look at the guys who don't make it and the guys who do, like, I think a lot of times when guys don't make it, it's because they think the stuff that's always worked is still going to work in the NBA, or maybe even more so, like not even that it'll work or not work, that they'll get the chance to play that way in the NBA when only like 2 or 3 guys on every team do. And it's generally not going to be you at the start of your career if you're not a top 5 pick going to a lottery team. So that really flashed. And then the fact that his parents like let him quit AAU when he wanted some time off. And like we all like see like stuff with load management now. Baxter Holmes of ESPN put together like this great story about like how a lot of like the roots of that take place in AAU culture, and how you have guys come into the league and are already sort of broken physically. So maybe from a physical perspective that helped him, but just mentally, like what stands out to me, and this is kind of what you were just alluding to, was like at a very young age, they kind of like, all right, like you are going to get to where you want. Like, we're not going to drive you there. We're not going to force you there. If you want to be this good, you can. And it seems to have like developed this thing in his head that it's like, all right, like I actually do want that. And like, in turn, like all the work that he's put in to get to this point probably isn't like work to him. It's just what he wants to be doing.
Yeah, absolutely. The release point story was fascinating. It was really cool to hear his dad share that. And they were great about sharing anecdotes in general, kind of just development about him, from a young age, whether it was on the court or just as a person. But yeah, and I think what stands out in Quentin's game a lot is like there's not really a spot up 3 he won't take, like that he's not confident to take because he knows that nobody's going to block it. I mean, unless like an Evan Mobley or a Jaren Jackson or a Giannis closes out on him maybe, but like the guys that are guarding him, particularly in closing out, he's not bashful at all. And I think that like that's a key part of his game, but also, as you mentioned, like the willingness from both him and his father to plan long term when he was probably tearing up, the AAU scene, and when he wasn't taking that hiatus over the summer, to make that change to kind of accommodate for circumstances down the line that you can't tangibly see at the moment, is a huge credit to him. But yeah, I thought it was, and I think that's when you talk about that AAU hiatus, I think that's another point that speaks to both just his mom and his dad having the resources there for him. Like, even though he wasn't playing AAU with people his age, he was still going to the gym and scrimmaging with his dad and with his dad's friends and other high school age players, and maybe people that were back home from college or overseas seasons. So he's still getting a lot of work in, but it was mostly just him playing basketball, right? Rather than being, dragging himself through these different AAU tournaments every weekend and kind of exhausting himself. And so once he came back from that, he just kind of realized that he still really enjoyed this and kind of how he had to get to that next point. So yeah, I think those are 2 great anecdotes that speak to just the way that his parents helped him get to this point, how they still help him get to wherever he's going to get throughout his NBA career and his life as a whole. So yeah, I really like those anecdotes, and I think it was cool. I really like the part, especially when his mom Tanya said that people, like parents, came up to them, or her specifically, at the end of the AAU season, and were like, "We wish we would have been able to do what you did for Quentin," and clearly it worked out. And I think that's something I can't even imagine, that like to like the just to be able to take that step back and listen to your kid, even though he is really good, and know, and to have it work out. So yeah, I really like those anecdotes too, and I'm glad they resonated.
All right, guys, we'll be back with Jackson in just a sec. But first, I want to tell you about our friends over at PrizePicks tonight, or rather, I guess Saturday night, because that's when they play. I'm going to take Emmanuel Quickley over 16.5 points. I'm taking Jalen Brunson over 5.5 assists. I'm taking Julius Randle. That's right. He's going to be healthy. He's going to play over 8.5 rebounds. So how does PrizePicks work? You pick 2 to 6 players and they go score more or less than their PrizePicks projection. You can win up to 25 times your money on any single entry. And the brilliance of it is there's no competing against other people, just you versus the projections available. PrizePicks offers projections on any sport you could watch. That includes the NBA, NFL, MLB, NHL, PGA, and more obscure ones like tennis, MMA, boxing, disc golf, Euro basketball, cricket, somehow more. Entries can be made in 60 seconds or less. It's that easy. They offer safe and fast withdrawals, and they're currently operational in over 30 states and Canada. So download the PrizePicks app or go to prizepicks.com to sign up and play daily fantasy sports. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with promo code Locked On. Deposit $100, PrizePicks will give you $100. If you deposit $50, PrizePicks will give you $50. So don't forget to enter promo code Locked On and sign up for an instant deposit match up to $100. Yeah, and I hope it's an article that like parents of current like middle school and high school age kids really, I mean, seriously, because it's like it is kind of an epidemic. I mean, the number of games that are put on younger kids' bodies, like at this point, like, and it's just weekend after weekend after weekend, week after week after week. And you hear coaches at the high school level like emphasize the importance of playing multiple sports all the times, but like sometimes it's not an AAU coach making that point. So I think this is I guess whatever the reverse of a cautionary tale is, this is a success story of why you can do that. But I'm also curious what you've made now of his development at the NBA level, because last year, like came in, like flashed right away as a shooter, I think it was right around Christmas, had that 27-point game where he sort of announced to the world like, hey, I'm here. And like, it's like, wow, the Knicks nailed the 25th pick again. Like everyone had sky high expectations for him to come into the year. Then you were a little panicky because you keep hearing like foot injury. He's supposed to be back in a day. He's supposed to be back in 2 days. He's supposed to be back in 3 days. It goes on and on and on. Eventually misses the first 10 or so games of the season and comes back in. And to your point, when he starts playing, when Tibbs shortens the rotation, boots Evan Fournier, that is the turning point in this Knicks season. And it's so funny to me because the version of the Knicks that at least I'm so excited about now, and I think has a real chance to get out of the first round against an excellent Cleveland team, is almost very different than the one that ripped off that. I think it was a 9-game winning streak, right? Because that was Mitchell Robinson was out for most of that. It was Jericho Sims. It was Isaiah Hartenstein playing together. It was Deuce McBride getting a ton of minutes off the bench, and it was building around a defensive identity. And now by the end of the year, this team has transformed into an offensive juggernaut, one that kind of inexplicably finished with the 4th highest offensive rating in the history of basketball. Tom Thibodeau, who would have guessed it? But I think Grimes is kind of a microcosm of that transformation, not in that his defense was falling off in any real way, but that is what he was bringing to the table. He was bringing the ability to be closeouts to the table. And then the one thing you were so sure you could count on his shooting was a little bit dicey, right? It was really good that first month he was back. And then pretty much from like the first 10 games of the season until the All-Star break, about a 40-game stretch, he's right around 33% from three for about half the season, which like kind of gets you thinking like, all right, the jumper, it still looks beautiful. Like it still looks like it should go in every time. But at times like he got a little reticent, started passing up some shots, and then post All-Star break, it's a total transformation, right? 22 games, 45% from three, 7 attempts per game. And he's incorporating the driving, and he's incorporating the defense. And it's very similar to what we've seen from Emmanuel Quickley this year. And you could speak on this from a broader perspective around the league. But what you see with so many young guys, right, where it's not linear, it comes in fits and spurts. But then when it all starts clicking, it's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, I think, last year with Quentin, the defense was there and the floor spacing was there, but he couldn't really attack closeouts. Like he was really timid. It felt like he didn't really know what he wanted to do if he got run off the arc. He couldn't finish for crap, really. I think he was an okay finisher. He couldn't get to the rim, I think is what the numbers would say. Sorry. So sometimes I get that mixed up. But decent finisher, but couldn't really get there. So like how much did that finishing help you? But one of the worked with Penny Hardaway this summer, and one of the things that I wrote about this in the story, I think they've been trained to some capacity even pre-draft because they have a connection through his agency. But when I talked with Penny and when I talked with Quentin about what they worked on, some of the big stuff was attacking closeouts, was improving that finishing and kind of that passing on the move. They worked on his point and his shooting guard skills. He was constantly in motion. I didn't necessarily include the specific quote, but Penny talked a lot about kind of trying to like emulate the Warriors motion heavy offense, like sending him through a lot of that stuff. And it's a lot of quick decision making. It's a lot of, I think a lot of quick decision making, a lot of movement. And I think you can see those themes pretty prevalent in the way Quentin approaches offense. And And so like now I think his rim frequency is up to like 30%. The finishing's a little better. The connective passing is still there. I really like kind of what he can do as an interior passer. And when I think kind of around a Julius Randle, Jalen Brunson led offense and just a led team, what the Knicks really need is that point of attack defense. Obviously, Quickley is quite good there as well, but point of attack defense on starting lineup. And Quentin gives you that. They need quick decision making. It's not a great passing team. I think that's been covered well. Like it's really remarkable how good this offense is, despite not being a super quick decision making, super playmaking heavy offense. And Quentin gives you both those. Not in a Luka or Jokic sense where he's breaking down defenses, but you kind of get him the ball, get the scramble defense. He's going to make the right decision. So. And they need floor space. And obviously, Brunson's been a really good shooter. Really, Randall's been pretty good on really good volume to help space things. But kind of the blend of both, where you're very effective from deep and you get up a high number of threes, when you get shots, I think is really useful. So those are the things that stand out to me. Is just kind of his growth, attacking closeouts and making stuff happen there. And those are, obviously things that he worked on this summer with Penny, and I'm sure others. I'm sure he worked with other people as well on similar things. But it's cool to be able to kind of see what the numbers say, and then also hear, after the fact that, that's what they worked on. Like it's just a cool thing from, someone who covers the league and whatnot.
All right, guys, that is it for now, but tune in about, I'm going to say 3 hours. We're aiming for about 1 o'clock. And we are going to have a part 2 out with Jackson where we finish talking about Quentin Grimes. You can tell I'm getting choked up just saying this. Excuse me. Talking about Quentin Grimes' ceiling, his long-term future on the Knicks, and also briefly previewing Knicks Cavs and giving you an initial taste to that. And then if you want a deeper dive, well, you're going to have to tune in tomorrow where we're joined by Evan Damerel and do a whole deep dive on Knicks Cavs, the host of the Locked on Cavs podcast. So that should be a lot of fun. But until then, I'm Gavin Schall. Thank you so much for tuning in. We'll talk to you soon on Locked on Knicks.